Hello, and welcome to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. We're about to start a debate on the war that is going on in Ukraine, but more specifically on what are the economic consequences of everything that's going on. We're going to be taking a Southern European view in our address of the situation. Now, some of my guests, you recognize them at first sight because I'm truly surrounded by a great panel of experts. The first of them here joining me in the studio in Madrid, Maria Blanco. She's a lecturer at the San Pablo CEU University, the author of several books. Maria, pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
I'm also joined by Natalia Collado. She's a research fellow at the ESADE ECPOL, the Center of Economic Policy at ESADE Business School. She holds a master's degree as well in industrial economics by the Carlos III University here in Madrid. Great to have you as well, Natalia.
Thank you for inviting me.
And this picture wouldn't be complete without our two guests joining us live from Italy. On the first hand, I want to say hello to Angela De Martis. She's a research fellow at the Centro Eunadi, a think tank based in Torino, and a postdoctoral researcher as well at the Institute for Financial Management at the University of Bern. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And I also want to say ciao to Carlos Stagnaro, the head of research at the Bruno Leone Institute, an Italian think tank based both in Milano and Torino, that also works to promote a free market and competition culture. Carlo is one of Italy's most prestigious economists as well. Carlo, bienvenuto.
Hello, I'm not sure. Ciao.
Okay, so we're very happy to be here with you, but obviously we are addressing a very difficult topic. We know that the effect of war is very serious. There's talk of already 5 million people fleeing Ukraine. Many of them obviously will be entering EU soil, and there will be a need to formalize new immigration policy and to improvise it on the go. Today, however, we want to go a bit beyond the more specifically human side of war, which is indeed actually the most tragic one. And we're going to be touching on how this war is affecting us in our pockets, in our economic life, which is also obviously a human side to it. But I guess a bit less dramatic than the more geopolitical military aspects of this war. And I want to start with you, with Natalia, because we know that there is these negative effects, and we know that we have a common market that in a sense is being disrupted with the many turbulences that are going on right now in the eastern area. So what would you say are the main priorities right now to kind of lessen the impact of this war on European society?
Well, it has been recently published the spring forecast from the European Commission, and we have seen that they have revised downward the growth projections for this year. What is the main driver of this downward revision? Well, the decrease in consumption from the population. Why is it happening? Because inflation, caused mainly by the spike in energy prices that has get worse after the invasion of Ukraine. That's one of the major causes. And also supply chain disruptions, because we have seen the new lockdowns in China and different countries in Asia. So everything is getting worse. I mean, we have one thing and then one thing on top of that. And the main issue here is to try to narrow down the budgetary policies to try to get to the people who most need them. So try to recover the consumption and to lessen the impact on economic activity. In that regard, for example, in Spain, the Bank of Spain has recently also published their annual report, and they stressed that the budgetary policies need to focus on vulnerable population and vulnerable sectors most affected by the consequences of the war. For example, indeed, in that sense, the package, it was approved recently in Spain, approved grants and subsidies, for example, for the transport sector, the agriculture, but also it did other things that were not the ideal ones, such as a generalized fuel discount. This is in a period where we don't have too much fiscal margin. This is not the best strategy to try to lessen the impact on the economic activity, and at the same time to control or to limit the inflation. So Yeah.
And what about you, Angela? What's your take on what are the main priorities right now in the sense of economic policy in a country like Italy and just overall for all of Europe, given all of what's going on, which is a lot,
Yes, so beyond the possible measures that can be adopted by central banks, who we know they monitor risks, they monitor vulnerabilities, and they care about financial stability, other measures, for example, could be implemented with respect to, for example, controlling the pandemic and its recovery, but also ending the war in Ukraine and solving the supply chain bottlenecks and problems that we've been experiencing. And in this regard, for example, governments will need to put in place measures that can shield consumers and low-income households that are mostly affected by price increases. And actually, most of these measures have already been discussed, they've already been proposed, and even enacted since September, when the energy crisis was already happening. And related to this, for example, among others, some of the measures include reduced energy tax, but also transfers to vulnerable groups like low-income families, but also financial support for businesses. As we know, this is it's very important. At the same time, the extent of these inflationary pressures that we see, and so the containment measures will also depend on the degree to which, for example, companies will pass their higher costs to the consumers, and if their higher corporate profits translate into higher wages or not. And following up on this, we see that countries like Italy and Spain, they have adopted a series of packages. For example, in Italy, already in September, they approved measures worth 3 billion euros to balance the rise in energy prices. And this also involves state support for struggling households, and with the March package, a reduction in the price of gasoline by 25 cents. In May, another package of measures came out and is directed at helping families and businesses, but also at speeding up, for example, the placement of renewable energy. So to still have an eye on the climate change agenda.
Maria, I wonder, we're trying to tackle some of the consequences of inflation, which show up in different areas of the economy. Energy prices are the most obvious one, but there is something that comes before that, I guess, which is monetary policy. And that's not being addressed, I guess, as at the center of the debate. There is some talk of normalizing monetary policy at the end of the year, as if this could wait until the end of the year. And there is not enough discussion or maybe blame put on the excessive binge that the central banks have been pursuing for the last several years, and with the pandemic just to a whole new level, with not just the quantitative easing, but also the zero-bound interest rates and everything that is de facto extremely non-conventional monetary policy.
I think that the proper word is not maybe blame, but to assume the responsibility in order to address what's going on and what will be going on in the future, in the recent future, and not only to the end of the year, but in 2023, from now in 2 or 3 years. We don't know when will be the end of the war, unfortunately. Hopefully, by the end of this year, the war will be over, hopefully, but who knows? And the problem is that if we don't face the responsibility from central banks, who it was, well, normal and sounding policy to launch these packages and pandemia packages, but they were feeding these packages and this help well beyond the pandemic crisis, increasing the supply of euros, that together with the problem in our balance of trade, our trade balance, the decrease in our exports, making the demand for euros decrease, then what we have is the inflation that came from the last year. It's not new. The inflation was here in the last year. too. So now I think that if we don't address this inflation as a monetary phenomenon, we will be in serious danger, especially if you take into account that the effect of inflation is different in Italy than in France or Portugal. In Spain, our inflation rate is very high. In Germany, is also elevated. But the impact is different from one country to another country. And to have a joint answer to this problem will be very difficult for the European Union, especially if the unemployment is also different from one country to another country. So the European Central Bank is in a very difficult situation because it has to increase interest rates or to issue some policies, taking into account that the impact in different countries will be different and that probably there will be two speeds in the recovery. Probably the Southern Europe countries, like our countries, and another one. The other countries' recovery at different speeds.
And then, Carlo, I wanted to ask you about, given the fact that this seems to obviously be a concern, the fact that there could be different speeds coming out of this situation, and the fact that the impact itself of inflation is not homogeneous. We see some countries that are doing much more poorly than others. I do want to question you on that. What can the countries do at the national level? We've talked about alleviation. We addressed that with Angela and with Natalia, but I wanted to address what can you do at the macro level to try and contain what is in part an imported inflation, because, for example, if the euro is weaker, everything that you're buying from the dollar area is going to become more expensive, for example. Or if this increase in the money supply has been in place for a long time, the way in which it will filter will necessarily be higher in those countries which have higher public deficits. What can you tell us about those different lessons from the past that we seem to have forgotten?
Yeah, I think there are three main points. First of all, it is true that national governments all over Europe are spending huge money to mitigate the increases in energy prices. I tend to agree with Natalia that they should be more careful in how they are doing so, in the sense that strong interventions like those we have in Italy or that you are having in Spain and in other countries could be justified if we were facing a very short-term increase in the price of energy. But everything tells us that, unfortunately, the price spike is here to stay for at least a few years. So that means that we are committing enormous amounts of money for who knows how much time. Speaking about Italy, we have spent so far about 20 billion euro just in reducing the toll, the energy price toll for virtually all of the citizens, instead of focusing on just the low income and most vulnerable consumers. So the first point is that I think we have to be more careful and to gradually phase out these massive interventions. Second point is that we have another proof that countries should manage their public finances carefully. Today, the countries that have lower public debts and lower, that have historically had lower public debts and lower deficits, have more fiscal space to address the crisis than those countries like Italy that were more expansionary in the design of their fiscal policy, even in years like 2021, where the rate of economic growth was very high. And the third point is that, especially in these countries that can do relatively little by spending money that we don't have, it becomes even more important to adopt that kind of reforms that can increase productivity, for example, liberalization or promoting competition, or introducing the simplifications and reducing the red tape. There is not a single bullet, I think, to address the crisis. There are a number of measures that should be taken. None of them is easy. I think that low-hanging fruits have been already picked a long time ago.
Let's continue with you, Natalia. I mean, there's economic implications of the war that overlap with energy policy, with the climate agenda. What do you think is going to be the impact, and what would be the smart way to address the Ukraine war in both the climate agenda that had been developed up so far? How should we adapt it from now on? And what about the energy policy that we've been pursuing for the last previous years? And how should we adapt to the current scenario?
Yeah, right now we are at a point of a turning point in terms of energy policy, because our prime objective or our main goal right now is to cut any relations with Russia relating to energy. And this goes hand in hand with our climate objectives, as you mentioned. So right now we are in a point where we can take advantage of the synergies these both goals have in common, and keep or give a step forward in our decarbonization of the economy. The 18th of May, the European Commission approved the REPowerEU plan, and in that they stress out the importance of tackling both objectives at the same time. So this plan sets out different initiatives to increase the deployment of solar panels, to, for example, increase the energy savings and energy efficiencies, and they as well increase the target of renewable share for 2013 from 40 to 45%. So we are in a moment that it's an opportunity. Unfortunately, the circumstances that prompt this opportunity aren't the best ones, obviously, but it's an opportunity to accelerate the energy transition, and it's already happening.
And Angela, I just wanted to press you on this issue. I mean, we need energy to be, if possible, cheap as well. And that is another element that's part of the conversation. The more we pursue some of these goals, the more reliable we will be on our own production. That's also goes hand in hand with decarbonization by definition. But what about the costs to some of the industries that are facing tighter and tighter deadlines to get to these objectives?
Yes, that's an excellent point. So following the Russian invasion in Ukraine in February, the topic of energy and its implications have put the global climate agenda again into further difficulty. So we know, for example, from the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, which is the UN international agency that studies climate change, and also from the Glasgow Climate Conference in 2021, that it is now or never to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the energy transition and the decarbonization process are, however, given the war, at a crossroad. So on the one hand, we're facing an energy crisis situation, considering that Europe is dependent on Russia for about 30% of its oil and 40% of its gas. And on the other hand, we have a climate promise of the zero emissions target by 2050 to limit global warming. So we can think of two roads that we could take. One would prioritize the energy crisis and increase fossil fuels production to meet rising energy prices. And so this means that the decarbonization process would become longer, more painful and costly. The second path that we could take would instead use the instability of the war as an incentive to accelerate the decarbonization process, so to eliminate fossil fuel dependence. And Europe actually seems to have taken this second road with a draft of a joint plan presented in March by the European Commission that sees the independence from Russian-sourced fossil fuel by 2030.
Maria, I just wanted to press you on the current situation in Spain and how does this crisis find us. We do seem to have a problem, for example, a chronic public deficit problem, extremely high unemployment compared to European standards. Most of our political landscape is considered to be right now fairly radical from an outsider's perspective, and that just doesn't seem to be the best fit to tackle a situation like this. We see infighting all the time between the two parties in government, which also doesn't help create a coherent agenda. The opposition parties are facing very significant changes. There's the rise of extremism, the rise of separatism.
Coming to Spain, well, the situation in Spain, I think, is the result of immature democracy in which we have forget about the rule of law, we have forget about the importance that the civil society, have the power to claim to the politicians and to ask the politicians to behave properly. And instead of this, we have bought all the populist messages coming from the right, from the left, from the center, from everywhere. And unfortunately, the pandemic encourages the government to increase its size. And nowadays, the problem is something amazing, like, for example, are we going to, or is the government going to behave rationally in order to spend properly the European funds, the pandemia package of funds, etc.? Or, as usual, are they trying to spend all this money in political, I don't know, gifts for the voters, etc., which is terrible. It's terrible that this happened in the 2008 crisis, and unfortunately, my guess is that it's going to happen right now, and we are missing the opportunity to put in practice some reforms we really need in the labor market, for example, that is too rigid, etc., and in the energy industry too. So the problem in Spain is that everything is politicized, and we are not in a democracy, but in a partitocracy, if you allow this word. And maybe we, the citizens, should think twice and ask the politician to behave as mature politicians in a mature liberal democracy.
So the one thing I was thinking, just listening to you, is that Italy was kind of trying to pursue that sort of mature policy making. At least that was the idea behind the decision to basically lead Mario Draghi all the way to head of government. And we know that Italy has a huge debt problem. Spain is catching up. We're doing our best to catch up. but Italy obviously is doing even worse on that front. Political instability, what can I say? It's been kind of chronic for the last several decades. And more recently, obviously, the COVID crisis hit Italy and Spain very hard. But the idea that Draghi would be brought on board was supposed to give some order into this whole big package, which is worth 200 billion in the case of Italy. And I must say, it's been a while now. The funds are beginning to get allocated. What's your perception, Carlos, so far? How do you think Draghi is heading the country into this very complex bailout and reform package? Is it transparent? Is it well targeted? Is it being managed properly? Or is it another disappointment?
Well, let me make a short consideration about energy before. I agree with Maria that one thing is to agree on the need to cut emissions as soon as possible, and even to define very ambitious targets in terms of reducing emissions. And you can do that by introducing market-friendly policies, for example, by pricing carbon emissions. But the way the EU and national governments are addressing the climate problem is not by doing what is economically and environmentally rational to do, but by resorting to the entrepreneurial state. If you look at Europe's climate plans, it's not at all about cutting emissions. It's about increasing solar power by this much, and wind power by that much, and energy efficiency by that much. And it's all a bunch of top-down decisions, which are very unlikely to be economically efficient, even under the assumption that they may be environmentally effective, which I'm not actually sure. And we are seeing that very well in the present circumstance, where both the national governments and the European Union are basically undermining every functioning of the markets in the energy sector by capping prices here, subsidizing consumption there, introducing new regulations there, or asking state-owned companies to sell energy below costs, like they have done in France, and so on and so forth. So I think it's very much important to shed light on the distinction between climate goals, which are absolutely fine, and climate policies, which are not necessarily fine as well. That said, let me go back to Italy.
We can tie it to the bailout package because it's actually very targeted in that sense.
Yes, definitely. So your question is was whether Draghi is let's say is performing his duty in an orderly way. So my answer is orderly compared to what? What I mean is that the current situation is definitely an improvement as compared to the previous government, which was absolutely one of the most ineffective, interventionist and wasteful governments we ever had in the whole Italian history. And I think that the current government managed it very well, the vaccination campaign, and the last, and possibly the most difficult waves of COVID. In terms of economic policy, I think they injected some more rationality in the debate, but still, this may not be Draghi's own fault. It may be a fault of the entire majority on which he has to rely. But still, the economic policy of the government is based on limitless spending. Some of these expenditure may be reasonable or may be justified. Just to make an example, the government has launched a massive program to digitalize the public administration, which was very much, working like 50 years ago, and it needed a huge upgrade. Other policies I'm frankly more skeptical about, and I go back to the energy issue. We are spending tons of money to reduce energy prices to consumers, which, by the way, is an implicit incentive for them to consume more when you would want consumers to consume less because there is scarcity of supply. And in terms of reforms, I think the government started with an ambitious package of reforms, but as all of these programs, all of these law proposals enter into the parliament, they are at best watered down, and sometimes they are just stalled. So the performance in retrospective, at least in terms of introducing reforms and leaving a structural change in the country, may be a little bit disappointing. And so my conclusion is that even though Spain is going to catch up Italy in terms of public debt, Italy is like the horizon. The more you get closer, the more it gets distant.
Yes, I'm hoping at least it's not a cliff. And I just wanted to ask about some case studies we could look at, because we've complained enough, and I think it was necessary, because quite frankly, both Spain and Italy, if you take a look at it in health metrics and in economics metrics, we did among the worst countries in Europe during this pandemic. So I think this was well due. And right now, obviously, this war is catching up with our guard down at a weak point in our political and economic system. I think we can all agree on that. Now, my question is, which countries are getting it right, which countries are doing some things that you are looking up to. I mean, I will not call any name. I will just wait for you to wave your hands up and let me know who are you watching closely, who's getting something right, what are we looking at, which case studies in reform do we have right now? Don't give me that awkward silence, because there must be someone getting it right.
Well, I will break the ice. And
Good.
In terms of, for example, I was referring previously to the fuel discount, generalized fuel discount we have here in Spain. And also our colleagues in Italy mentioned they have...
which, to be clear, is general.
Is generalized, exactly, exactly. For example, a better policy to try to compensate or alleviate the effect on low-income household and vulnerable people, we have the example in Canada, for example. They have a generalized carbon tax, and then what they do is they give like a tax credit in their income tax to all households, but it varies on their income, their urban-rural situation. So it benefits all the population, but it benefits the most to the people that really needs it. And doing that, we don't harm the price signal that Carlo was referring just a moment ago. So I think that's a good example in terms of climate policy. And
it's a very good point you guys make, because it gets to a point where we don't know what the price really is right now in the market. Who else wants to throw in their hat? Come on. Maria,
well,
I'll get with you.
I don't know a specific country. I haven't studied in the specific case studies, etc. But just by looking where are our young talents flying to, well, they are going to countries where the taxes are not very high, lower than Spain, which is not that difficult, and where entrepreneurship is promoted. Because I think that it's true, and I'm deeply concerned on what's going on with people with low incomes. But I think that one of the present dramas is that the medium class are disappearing. The middle class is disappearing. And this means that there is a decrease in the ability of European citizens to save and invest. That is the future for employment, for future employment, and for how our young people are going to earn their living. So I will focus now on those countries that are offering opportunities to young people, and where our students...
They are voting with their feet.
Exactly, they are voting with their feet. So I think that it's important to take into account and to have in mind this phenomenon that is new, is like the opposite of what happened under the industrialization phenomena. This is where the middle class appear, the boom of the middle class, the bourgeoisie that Deirdre McCloskey highlighted, etc. Now is disappearing. And I think is a drama because of what I just mentioned, the inability to save and invest. I don't refer to high class or rich people, etc., but the middle class, the owners of the loanable funds, where the future of our economic reside precisely.
So rethink energy policy, focusing on prices and more clean, more transparent mechanisms, as in Canada. Promote entrepreneurship, lower taxation as well, create a more entrepreneurship-friendly environment. What about Angela? What are you thinking as you hear some of these suggestions?
Yeah, so I agree with this line of thought, and I would also, again, would like to underline what Maria just mentioned a few minutes ago, that it is precisely in this negative scenario with the Russians' invasion to Ukraine that we're also, however, seen, without really pointing at which countries is doing better than others, we're seeing, however, more countries that actually are more aligned, which is something that we didn't see in the previous in the previous years, even during the COVID pandemic. So I think that this is one important point to underline. We need to be on board, everybody, all countries has to be on board. This regards to the climate transition, so climate policies. It is not just an effort of one country, but it has to be a joint effort of all European countries. Similarly, in terms of having an entrepreneurial spirit that encourages young people to do more and to perform and grow. This also relates to the health status of our institutions. And again, this is something that I think it's supposed to be seen with the lenses of a joint European effort.
Mm-hmm. Carlo, are you looking into any countries, any?
Well, let me mention a hopefully success story from Italy in terms of good policy making.
Good.
I've been complaining a lot, so I cannot
we
be
all
accused
have.
of being too
Don't
much
worry.
partisan. But I think that the Draghi government introduced a very clever measure in order to simplify and promote the installation of rooftop solar power. Until now, when in order to put solar panels on the roof of your house, you had to seek for an authorization, which was the usual longish Italian thing. Now the government has introduced a very simple innovation by saying that unless your house is kind of an historical building with some special value in its roof, you are allowed just to put your panels on without asking a permit to anybody, which is as easy as you can think of, but also as effective as it can be, at least if this simplification will not be made more complicated along the way. And this is exactly what I think Maria was referring to when she said that you need to unleash entrepreneurial forces and entrepreneurial ingenuity.
Mm-hmm. We've seen some of that in Spain regionally as well. We've seen some interesting competition, and there's a big gap right now in the economic policy mix in Madrid, which has become more liberal-friendly. Catalonia, which has dwelled into a lot of infighting between the different sections within the separatist camp. And all of that teaches us lessons, right? We can compare not just within countries, but also between countries, but also within countries. So a final round of questions I wanted to ask to each of you. What do you think is going to be the real cost of this crisis at the end of the day? What's the biggest economic setback that is going to be the result of this? Is it going to be unemployment? Is it going to be wage losses? Is it going to be stagnation? Is it going to be the cost of inflation? What are the main economic blows that this war is bringing to southern European countries? And let's just make it national, Angela, to Italy, and then I'll ask as well the same question to Carlo, and then we'll move on to Natalia and Maria to focus on the specific hit to Spain.
So summarizing some of the main points that we discussed, I think it can lead to positive economic and social change if we think, for example, at using the instability created by Russian invasion of Ukraine as an incentive to, again, accelerate with climate policies and the climate agenda, which is the EU Green Deal, which aims at carbon emissions and achieving economic growth not tied to resource use. And definitely this is a joint and important deal in also recovering, because we're still recovering from a global pandemic. So this could lead to positive change with this respect.
What about you, Maria? What do you fear are the lasting wounds of this economic crisis?
I think that, well, my main worry is about, being in Spain is unemployment, but in general, the decrease in the purchasing power of people, of common people. And the positive side is, because it's true, we've been we've been complaining all the time. So I need a positive message. The positive message could be, well, that maybe people will think twice before giving the power to the state. I know that we need a joint answer to the war, of course, and to something like a pandemic, etc. But maybe people will think twice, and especially looking at the government and how, rationally or not, the government is spending our money. So maybe there is a positive message underlying everything, all this situation.
So the silver lining, I guess, from this situation, Natalia, is that it seems to me that it's pretty clear that on the Italian front, on the Spanish front, we know what are the main issues we should tackle. On the European front, it's pretty clear what's more or less on the agenda right now. So what do you think why do you think some of these reforms haven't happened yet? Because if we had had this debate a few months ago or a few years ago, many of these topics would have been on the table anyway. What's your take on that? Why hasn't this happened?
Well, the key issue here is that some of the reforms that we need aren't the most popular ones. I mean, for example, let's take the example of the pension reform in Spain. Right now, we are at a crossroad because pensions need to be revalued, and we have the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, in historic.
Double digit.
Yeah, double digit, yeah. So if we do this revaluation, it's creating a lot of instability and debate among the population because it raises fairness issues, right? So that's a big problem, and it's good for the elderly people, but what do we say? What do the young people say about this? So it's difficult, and maybe this is one of the reasons the reforms that we need aren't taking forward.
Through.
Yeah.
Indeed, they're not the lowest hanging fruits, and indeed they're not the most popular ones. But someone needs to do them, Carlo. So I'm just thinking, what's your take on that? Why are these things not happening? Because we seem to be more or less in agreement of at least the main topics there are to address.
Well, I think because the point is that in most EU member states and at the European level as well, the dominant culture is very much interventionist. I mean, both left and right, if you ask them what to do about this problem, they will always answer by there should be a law that, or there should be a new tax, or there should be a new spending. So I think that the problem is that whenever this crisis situation face up, like the pandemics before, and even more the war in Ukraine now, the Pavlovian reaction is that of increasing the size of the state and to mess up with markets. Again, look at what we are doing with the energy prices thing. We are at the same time reducing taxes on energy, therefore we want people to consume more, and then we are subsidizing energy efficiency, that is, we are paying people to consume less. And if energy supply becomes more scarce, prices go up, and then we say, no, that's we don't like it, so let's put a cap on the price. And we ask companies to invest more in order to increase the supply, so they do, and they capture, of course, the outcome of higher prices, and we say, no, that's not enough, profits are bad, and so we are going to introduce a tax on windfall profits. So there is a basic inconsistency in the way we are addressing, at least from an economical point of view, in the way we are addressing the crisis, which can only be explained by acknowledging that our, the public opinion perhaps in Europe, and certainly most of the policymakers, just don't believe in markets, and they don't believe that they know how to do stuff. And so they keep doing stuff and they keep making the situation worse.
So I think that over the last several minutes, we've covered some of the main topics of everything that's going on, not just in the European continent, also in the European Union, and more specifically, the European Union's economy in its southern countries, two of its largest ones, as Spain and Italy. Now, it's clear to me that we all find many structural problems that need to be addressed in our countries, and I guess that this discussion could have been held 2 years ago and many of them would be on the table, but now we have to add two different elements into the mix: a war and a pandemic. And when we combine these two, it's obvious that the price of this war, the price of this pandemic, and just the overall status of our economies and countries has taken a turn for the worst in the last 2-3 years. So there's things we need to do. There's a lot of homework that comes out of this debate. So I just want to thank you all for joining me. Maria, my pleasure. See you very soon.
I hope
Natalia, my pleasure as well. Congratulations on all the work that SADC Pol is doing. Angela, as well. Pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you for having me.
And Carlo, same thing. Grazie mille, and thank you for your inputs.
Thank you very much, and ciao.
Ciao, and yes, just pushing forward with reforms, promoting freedom. That's the main goal of events like this. So thank you for following this debate. And please keep an eye on everything that the Friedrich Naumann Foundation will keep on doing. It will update you on all of its coming plans on its website, social media. So don't miss it, and keep promoting freedom in Europe and worldwide. Thank you very much for joining us.